You're listening to the Grace Plus Zero podcast, exploring the crossroads of culture, faith, and family from a biblical worldview. And now your host.
Then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. Leviticus 25:9. Welcome to Grace Plus Zero. I'm your host, Brian Moore, and we took a week off, hit the beach, come back. And this week we have a lot of stuff lined up for you. But do want to mention a little bit before we get into this particular episode, which is an introduction to Jubilee. This is only the beginning. We're going to give you kind of just a little quick synopsis of what the year of Jubilee was, and we're going to get into it pretty deep, talk about it in the next episode with much more depth. But today we are going to just introduce it and talk a little bit about it. But before we get into that, I'd like to remind everyone that our podcast is available on iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, Podbean, Podchaser, Pod Addict, whatever podcast platform that you use. You can get your podcast fix with us through one of those networks. We're also available on YouTube, and you can visit us at Grace Plus Zero on YouTube. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, and our call is at Grace Plus Zero. That's all one word, at Grace Plus Zero. And that's also our Facebook page as well, at Grace Plus Zero. Our podcasts will drop there, so you can catch them on YouTube, and you can catch them on, the links will pop up on Twitter. They also pop up on Facebook. And then, of course, if you subscribe to the RSS feed, you can pick it up on iTunes, Spreaker, or any of those platforms that you use to get your podcasts. Also, if you'd like to send us an email, feel free to do so at gpzpodcast@gmail.com. gpzpodcast@gmail.com. All right, so this week's lineup we got for you here is Jubilee, and then we're going to have our History Matters segment, some interesting information about Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and a mysterious dream that Benjamin Rush had. In the news, we've got some very interesting stories for you and some pretty cool Bible facts as well. And in Parting Shots, we've got a really interesting documentary we're going to tell you about. That if you haven't watched it, it's a great documentary. Sit down and watch it with your family, and we'll get into a little bit more of that later on. But right now, let's jump straight into the feature topic for this episode. And like I said, this is just a little bit of a precursor. We're just going to kind of introduce it, tell you a little bit about it, and then the next episode we're going to spend some extensive time on it. Probably our longest episode to date will be our next one, so you can look for it to drop as well. The word Jubilee. Well, the word Jubilee literally means ram's horn in Hebrew. And in the book of Leviticus, the 25th chapter, 9th verse, as I read just a moment ago, was a sabbatical year, basically, for the Hebrew children. And it was a sabbatical year that took place after 7 cycles of 7 years. So, in other words, every 49th year. Now, the 50th year was to be a year of celebration for the Israelites. And the ram's horn, basically, would be blown on the 10th day of the 7th month to start the 50th year. And that particular 50th year was a year of universal redemption. And it's something now we don't read anywhere in particularly in the Bible where it says that they actually practiced and obeyed this particular order or command, but it was instituted, and we're going to read a little bit right now from Leviticus 25th chapter, 9th verse. And as I said before, then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. Now, I want to stop right there for just a second. That's in the 10th verse. Some of you may have caught that. You may have heard that before outside of the Bible. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. If you have heard it somewhere else, that somewhere else is probably the Liberty Bell. If you've ever visited Philadelphia, you will notice those very words are inscribed upon the Liberty Bell, and they're not there by any mere chance. Those that had it put there were perfectly aware of what the year of Jubilee was, and it was the year of redemption, a year that everyone was set free, and a year of celebration. So that's just a little nugget that ties into our American history. I'll continue reading with the 10th verse. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. A jubilee shall that 50th year be unto you. Ye shall not sow, neither reap that which groweth of itself in it, nor gather the grapes in it of thy vine undressed. For it is the Jubilee. It shall be holy unto you. Ye shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. In the year of this Jubilee ye shall return every man unto his possession. And if thou sell aught unto thy neighbor, or buyest aught of thy neighbor's hand, ye shall not oppress one another. According to the number of years after the Jubilee, thou shalt buy of thy neighbor, and according unto the number of years of the fruits, he shall sell unto thee. Now we go on reading. That's the 15th verse that we stop there. But let's talk a little bit about this year of Jubilee. As I mentioned before, the Liberty Bell, I want to get it out of the way real quick. I think it was William Penn who originally wrote the Charter of Pennsylvania, and it was like the 50th anniversary or something of that nature of the Pennsylvania Charter, when the proclaimed liberty throughout all the land and to all the inhabitants thereof was inscribed upon the Liberty Bell. So I had a note here. I just wanted to mention that and forgot to mention it again there a moment ago. But as we were talking about it, this Jubilee. So the word Jubilee itself literally means ram's horn in Hebrew. And on the 7th month, 10th day of the month, to start the 50th year of redemption, this ram's horn would be blown, and to signify the year of universal redemption. Now, the year of the Jubilee involved a year of release from indebtedness, and you can read this in the 25th chapter. I think it's verses 23 through 28. Tells us a little bit about this. In the 23rd verse, it says, "The land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine, for ye are strangers and sojourners with me." The 24th verse, "And in all the land of your possession ye shall grant a redemption for the land. If thy brother be waxen poor, and hath sold away some of his possession, and if any of his kin come to redeem it, then shall he redeem that which his brother sold. And if the man have none to redeem it, and himself be able to redeem it, then let him count the years of the sale thereof, and restore the overplus unto the man to whom he sold it, that he may return unto his possessions. But if he be not able to restore it to him, then that which is sold shall remain in the hand of him that hath bought it until the year of Jubilee, and in the Jubilee it shall go out, and he shall return unto his possession." Now, if you read this a little bit more carefully, you will really quick start to get the idea that the year of Jubilee was not just a year of a release of indebtedness. It was a year of release from any and all types of bondage, all prisoners, all captives, and they were set free. If you was a prisoner and you were a captive, the year of Jubilee came. you were set free. Now, if you were a slave, let's say, for example, you were indebted to someone, or you was a slave, or you had been sold into slavery due to your debt, you were released in the 50th year. So if you owed a debt to someone, all debts were to be forgiven. All property during the year of Jubilee was to be returned to its original owners. And to give you an example, to kind of put it in perspective a little bit for you, just imagine for a moment that perhaps the year of Jubilee was 2 or 3, let's say 3 years out there in the future in front of you. And you had just been convicted of some type of crime or whatever, and you were a prisoner. You would be able to look forward to that year of Jubilee, knowing that in 2 or 3 years, whatever the time frame was, I said 3 years, you would be able to be set free. It gave you something to look forward to, something to know that your debt or whatever, or in this particular case, that whatever crime you had done, you would be forgiven for it. If it was a debt that you owed, and there was 4, 5, 6 years away from the year of Jubilee, you would know that your debt would be paid within this, or be forgiven, within this period of time. If you had lost property, perhaps due to poor financial decisions or indebtedness, and perhaps it was property that your family had and they had handed it down, and you had lost it due to these unforeseen circumstances, that property would be restored back to its original owner. So it would be out of your hands for a period of time, but when the year of Jubilee came, according to the letter here, you were to have that property given back to the original owner. In addition to that, not only was debt and bondage and captivity and all of these things and debts were just these things forgiven and property returned, but also during the year of Jubilee, all labor was to cease for 1 year. So if as far as the physical labor that people would do to provide for themselves, labor was to cease basically for 1 year, and anybody who was bound by any type of labor contract was simply released from that contract. And one of the benefits of this was that both the people and the land itself would be allowed to rest. So this was a year of celebration, a great celebration that would have been highly looked forward to. And not only was the land able to rest, but so were the people. The year of Jubilee is going to paint a picture for us. It's a picture of a lot of New Testament themes that we're going to read about a little bit. For example, I'll mention just a few of these, but the Bible teaches us that Jesus Christ is the Redeemer of those who He came to set free. They were slaves and prisoners. They were in bondage, the bondage of sin. Go read, I encourage you this week to read Romans 8:2 and Galatians 5:1 and Galatians 3:22. And it's going to set the picture of the prisoner and how we were slaves to sin. And the debt of sin that we owed to God, well, it was paid on the cross by Jesus Christ, and He died in our room in our stead. And that debt that we have, or debt that we had, has been forgiven. It's been cast away as far as the east is from the west. That was a personal year of Jubilee for us. We'll talk about that next week. We're no longer in bondage. We're no longer slaves to sin. We've been set free by Jesus Christ, and we can truly enter into the rest that God has provided us. And we can cease laboring ourselves and trying to work our way to make ourselves acceptable to God, because the Bible says that we have been made acceptable in the Beloved. It's not by our own works of righteousness that we've done. The Bible says that our righteousnesses are as filthy rags And I want you to think about that. Righteousness is. We have more than one type of righteous, but we have no righteousness in the same type of righteousness that God has. If you have any righteousness whatsoever, it's the imputed righteousness of Almighty God. But our self-righteousness and things of that nature are all as filthy rags before God. So the Lord has set us at rest so we can cease to labor from trying to make ourselves acceptable before God, and He has made us acceptable. So the year of Jubilee, and we're going to get into a lot, there's just so much in this. It's sort of like a mink. You can just rub it and rub it and rub it, and it just keeps getting softer and softer. There's a lot of stuff in it, and we hope next week to be able to lay out some of those things for you. But until next week, we would encourage you to pick up and start with the 25th chapter of the book of Leviticus and read about the year of Jubilee with special focus starting with the 9th verse and going all the way through to the 38th verse, and focus on those verses as you read. And then some other reading that you can go along with that is Romans 8:2, Galatians 5:1, and Galatians 3:22. And also read Colossians 2:13 and 14. It'll explain our sin debt a little bit. And Hebrews 4 verses 9 and 10. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back in just a second with some news. All right, welcome back. I said there's a news there. We're going to put the news off to a little bit later. I've got a little ahead of myself there. Being at the beach probably made me a little bit lazy. Not that I wasn't already. But today we're going to talk our segment here, Faith in American History, and we're going to mention a little bit about Benjamin Rush's dream and a letter that he wrote to John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and give you just a little bit of a background real quick on this. Probably one of the most little known and very interesting stories in American history is the story of the conflict and the bitterness that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had toward one another. And what's really interesting about this is that these two gentlemen were integral in helping form this nation. And as they worked to form this nation, they labored side by side through the American Revolution. They went on and on and on. Eventually, those of you that have read a little bit about history, of course, you know that one of them was a Federalist and the other one was an anti-Federalist. And it is this political differences that they had, and in particular their position on the French Revolution, that just drove a wedge between these two guys. And in doing this, they actually went from being, pretty good friends to being bitter enemies. As a matter of fact, they were incredible bitter enemies for a very, very long period of time following the Revolutionary War, to the point that they had nothing to do with one another. Both men, I guess you could say, somewhat just abhorred one another. They could not stand the other one. Well, they both had a common friend, and one of the common friends they had, of course, was Benjamin Rush. And Benjamin Rush deserves a considerable amount of credit for helping to reignite the friendship of both Adams and Jefferson. And as I said before, all these men, all three of them were founding fathers. Benjamin Rush had a dream one night, and in a particular dream, as he had the dream that he had, he actually wrote about his dream in a letter that he penned to John Adams. And basically, in a nutshell, and I would like to take the time to read it, but it's a rather lengthy letter. But basically, he told him in a dream that he saw the two of them corresponding via letter, and that they eventually were able to resume their friendship. And he told him he basically dreamed that Adams, he's writing to Adams now. He told Adams that he dreamt that Adams wrote Jefferson, and that they began to slowly discuss their past disputes. And then they started, reflecting on things, and they put their differences aside. And this is what's really interesting about his dream. In the dream, the very words that he penned in the letter were that the two men sunk into the grave nearly at the same time, full of years and rich in the gratitude and praises of their country. So this dream that he had, he dreamt that they began to exchange letters, and they put their differences aside as they began to grow older, and that both of them died nearly at the same time. Well, this particular letter that he wrote to Adams encouraged Adams to send the first olive branch, if you will. And I think it was somewhere around 1812. Adams wrote a short letter, and out of the blue, it just arrived. Thomas Jefferson wasn't expecting it. And over the course of the next 14 years, these men exchanged over 158 different letters. They wrote about a lot of things, but about their friendship, about the memories that they had. Both of them admitted faults. They admitted mistakes that they had made. And it's believed by a lot of scholars that a lot of the letters that they wrote, they were hoping that posterity would be able to, or history would be able to look back upon those letters, and they would be remembered for the friendship as opposed to the bitterness that they held toward one another. And that's exactly what history now teaches us, is that they were able to put their confrontational differences aside, and they were able to be more calm and respectful toward one another. Both of the men died being very, very close friends. And Adams even wrote this in regards to Jefferson. He said, "You and I ought not to die before we have explained ourselves to each other." And both of them began to do so. And as they explained one of their differences, both of them admitted their faults, and they decided that it was best to put all that stuff behind them, and they died good friends. Now, here's what's really interesting. Thomas Jefferson had an intestinal disorder, and he fell into a coma in 1826, and he was in and out of consciousness for a period of time of about 24 hours. And then somewhere around noon on the following day, he passed away. And historically, looking at this, about the same time that Jefferson passed away, Adams was in a reading chair, and he also died. And it was about 4 or 5 hours afterwards. And one of the last words that John Adams actually spoke was, he said, "Thomas Jefferson survives," or "Thomas Jefferson still lives." There's some different accounts on this, but it was right before he died. And what's even more interesting is both of these men died on July the 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of Independence Day. All right. Welcome back to the show here. Now we've got some interesting notes here for you. We're going to take a look at some stuff real quick. All right, we got these Bible facts, some interesting Bible facts and information, I guess you could say, about the Bible or in regards to the Bible. Did you know that Charlton Heston, everybody knows Charlton Heston, he was cast as Moses in, of course, the big movie, The Ten Commandments. I remember as a child watching that. The reason he got cast for that particular role, most of you are probably aware of, had nothing to do with his acting. He wasn't a bad actor, but he kind of overacted a lot of times. But Charlton Heston got that particular role because he resembled Michelangelo's famous statue of Moses. He ended up actually later on playing Michelangelo himself in another film, but someone looked at the statue and they said, "Hey, that dude looks like Moses." Of course, we don't know. I'm pretty sure the statue had probably no resemblance to the real Moses, but Charlton Heston was able to get that role because that he looked like a statue that Michelangelo had made. Are you aware of the fact that there are 93 women who speak in the Bible and 49 of them are actually named? Now, they speak a total of, I think it's somewhere around 14,000 words, or basically 1.1% of the Bible includes women actually speaking. There's a total of 188 named women in the Bible, 49 of whom actually are named for speaking, and 93, of course, that actually speak. We don't know who all the other ones are. There's probably a joke somewhere in that, and I'm thinking of several right now, but it'd probably be in my best interest to not say anything about it. We'll move on from there. Another interesting note, almost all of the villains or / bad guys in the Bible, they have red hair. Yeah, I know it's kind of an interesting note. All of them don't have red hair, but a lot of them do. And, well, you know what they say about kids with red hair, so that probably has, there might be something to that. You never know. Some of the first and second books in the Bible were actually divided after they were written. For example, if you pick up the book of Kings and you see 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings was actually just one book, and they would, and if put together, it actually would be the longest book in the Bible. The reason I mention that is they were originally written, as I said, as one book. And the same also goes for 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Why did they split them up? Well, basically in the old days, they couldn't print these massive tomes for each book of the Bible. So basically what they did, it was very difficult to fit all of this on one lengthy scroll. And even if they could, the scroll was big enough, to get it on there, it would be too heavy to carry and manage. So what they did was they just broke down some of the longer books down into 2 volumes. So, for example, if you're reading 2 Samuel, it's really more like, Samuel Part 2, I guess you could call it. So that's just some interesting notes about the Bible. We'll come back here in just a second with some news and some interesting stories. All right, in the world of news, and we've got some a couple of interesting stories for you here this evening. City officials have removed the word Lord from a fallen police officer's memorial before they eventually removed the entire memorial. This is something, of course, usually when we read some of these things to you, you think Canada, because last week we had a bunch of Canadian stories, but no, this is in South Carolina. And keep in mind, South Carolina is probably one of the more conservative states in the Union. But in Tegakay City in South Carolina, there was a little bit of a controversy when a police officer's memorial had the word Lord in it. According to, I think it was the Christian Post that ran this story, a memorial was placed outside of the police department to honor police officers, and in particular, one officer in particular, as well as other officers who had previously died or been killed in the line of duty. And it hadn't been up no time at all, as a matter of fact, and they had received several complaints about the religious words on the memorial, and it caused the city officials to actually go out and cover up the word Lord, and I think it was on there like 3 different times, so they just covered it up. I want to say a little something about this. According to the officials of the city, they received several complaints. I'm going to tell you how this works. There weren't several people probably sitting around and just all of a sudden seen this and got angry. This is a collective, concerted effort on a group of people to do this. They have probably gotten together. They've worked this out. They have decided that they would call at different times. They, of course, for whatever reason, got organized and was able to get this done. But I can assure you that this wasn't just a bunch of people walking by and each of them decided they were offended or whatever by this. But nonetheless, the police department, or the city officials, did cover up the word Lord. Well, that wasn't good enough. Naturally, the people who were responsible for putting up the memorial, they became very upset. And in order to find a solution that they thought would appease both people, the city officials decided they would just remove the memorial. And this is a very unfortunate thing. They was hoping to, they say that they tried to appease both sides. There was only one side got appeased in this particular argument, and it's very unfortunate, and it's very interesting that in this particular time that we're living in, that we're seeing more and more instances of this. And as the old saying goes, I was taught a long time ago, the squeaky wheel always seems to get the grease. Well, maybe it's time, some other people start getting a little bit louder. Not saying cause trouble or anything like that, but, if you don't stand up for things like this, you're going to find more and more of these types of things taken away from you. It's very, very troubling. Another story, a veterans ministry group says that their YouTube page, says that YouTube actually blocked an ad from appearing on their, that they were trying to use on YouTube to advertise their particular veterans ministry. Why did YouTube block it? Well, because the ad included the word Christian. Well, according to a person who a Christian speaker, and he was a former Marine that works for this particular ministry. His name is Chad Robichaud. He said that the word Christian, according to YouTube's policy, was deemed a violation. He has, photographs of the email that he received. He has screenshots as well. And the ministry claims that YouTube is telling them that it was denied because of the word Christian. And he actually, shared this on Twitter and other forms of social media. Now, YouTube, in their defense, they're saying that when it comes to ads, and if you're not familiar with it, sometimes when you do monetize ads, there's a target audience that you can select, and you can put certain tag words in there when you're selecting that audience, and those particular ads will show up to people that fit that particular demographic. They say that they do not target people based on their belief. Now, just to test this theory out, Mr. Robichaud, he decided that he would move forward and he would try to send the ad forth again. Well, he submitted the ad, but this time he changed the word Christian to the word Muslim. He also submitted the word, I think it was Islam, and I'm not sure if he did any others or not, but guess what? It didn't get blocked. It was found acceptable. According to Mr. Robichaud, he says, unlike the word Christian, the word Muslim was perfectly accepted. He says Muslim or any religious belief should be approved equally. Yet this is clearly an example of bias. YouTube has responded to these particular allegations, as I said before, but they say that they do not have a policy against faith or anything of that nature. But it's rather interesting that they did block the ad because it had the tag word or the keyword, if you will, Christian. This is another example of social media and how social media just continues to all these cases are not by chance. These cases are popping up right and left. Social media, and Twitter is probably the worst. Facebook is pretty bad. Twitter is very bad. But they are selectively blocking opinions and views and ideologies that they disagree with. And speaking of blocking or banning something that they disagree with. San Francisco is back in the news. San Francisco, the city of San Francisco has banned official travel to any pro-life states. If you are an employee on official San Francisco or San Franciscan business, you will not be permitted to travel to any state that has a restrictive abortion law in place. There's a 11-member board of supervisors, and they have decided that the city will not finance any type of travel to any state that has any restrictive abortion laws. And the direct quote from one of the supervisors, Valley Brown from San Francisco, is, "It will expand the existing ordinance to states that have waged war on our constitutionally protected right to an abortion." Interestingly enough, cities like San Francisco they have no problem whatsoever, being a sanctuary city for illegal immigration, illegal immigrants. They talk out of one side of their mouth. They say something else. This is really interesting. According to the supervisor mentioned before, Brown, she said, "Let's put our money where our mouth is." So San Francisco is not going to finance any trips outside or into any states that they say has a radical restrictive abortion law. This is just another example of division in the country and how the cultural divide in this nation is much deeper than what people think. And we're starting to see more and more of these types of behaviors and more division and separation. I look at this and I say it's very similar to 1855, 1856, 1857, moving forward to the election of 1860. The country is seriously divided. However, this time it's not along physical geographical boundaries. It's over ideological boundaries. We have a lot in common. People in this country, if we sat down and we turned off the media and we got in a room with one another and we just talked about issues, we would find that we have a lot in common. But this constant ideological drag on society that lets us know what our divisions are and how we're different, and the fact that there's a lot of people in high positions of power that want us to take sides and boycott or protest or do things is just furthering that divide. And we reached a place that I don't know if we can come back from unless the Lord himself actually intervenes and does something. This is definitely a time that a lot of people need to be praying in this country, because this is the last thing we need to see is social and civil unrest in this country. And things of this nature just continues to further that divide. Some good news, positive news. I've got two real quick stories to share with you here. A young boy actually stopped breathing. This happened at a beach. He'd stopped breathing. He was 12 years old. His name is Levi Floyd. And he was at the beach, and according to sources, it appeared that he was a preteen boy. He dove into a wave and he never resurfaced. And his family noticed he didn't come back out. His father went looking. He found him. The boy had already turned blue. He brought the boy to the beach. He said the boy weighed about 120 pounds. Said that he was just lifeless. They began to a nurse that was on the beach began to do CPR. And people began to sing. That's right. People began to sing. Crowd gathered around. One of the ladies shouted. She said, one of the ladies, according to an eyewitness, said, "I remember running to them saying, 'Sing louder, babies, just worship him louder, sing louder.'" And they began to sing louder and louder and louder. And his father yelled, "I have a pulse." And according to authorities, the young man is now fully recovered, is in excellent shape. and I can only imagine what that scene would have been like being there. Another news, also a beach story. A father of 3 girls drowned while saving his 3 daughters. The 3 girls, I think this was in Florida, they were caught in a riptide, and the current was carrying them out. And his father of 3 jumped in the water, and he saved all 3 of his daughters. And unfortunately for him, the last one was being pulled away. He told his daughter to let go, and she was able to make it to the beach. Shortly thereafter, he was able to make it almost to the beach, and he collapsed. And according to authorities, he passed away and died there on the scene. This is just an example of someone sacrificing their life for their children, and it brings the thought to me, no greater love than this, that a man would lay down his life for his friend. And if there was ever an example of parental love or father's love for his children, it's that man there. He laid down his life so that his children could live, and I know it's something that they'll never forget for the rest of their life. Sad ending, but it's also a moving tribute to a father and his love for his family. Coming up next, we've got Parting Shots. All right. Parting Shots. I want to tell you a little bit about a video that I think you and your family would thoroughly enjoy watching, and it's called Monumental. It stars Kirk Cameron. I actually think it's even directed by him, or if not, he has a major role in it. And it is it's a documentary, but it's very, very, very interesting. It's something that the entire family needs to sit down and watch. More kids this day and time probably need to watch it. It's basically the story of America's beginnings. And it stars, as I said, Kirk Cameron. It's about 90 minutes long, and it follows him as he goes across Europe, back to the United States, to discover America's national treasure. What is America's national treasure? It's the people, the places, the principles, and the values that made America the most free and most prosperous and generous nation the world has ever known. A lot of people, I find it's a very inspiring movie. I think it's powerful. It's definitely a teaching movie. It's a movie that will teach a lot of interesting historical facts. It'll take you back to the Mayflower Pilgrims and a statue that was erected in 1889 commemorating them landing in Plymouth. And what it will do is the message, the symbolism of this particular statue teaches volumes about our Christian heritage, about the values, the principles, the laws that we have, the faith that helped establish this country. And everything that you see there points to, in this particular film, points to a God-centered, God foundation in which this nation was founded on. And it's just a really, really good movie. If you want to check out some info about it, I think it's monumentalmovie.com. Monumentalmovie.com. Highly recommend you check it out. It's a great sit down with the family, and it makes you appreciate America, especially from a biblical perspective as well. It's part of history that a lot more people do need to know. With that being said, this will be the end of this episode. And don't forget, next week we're coming back with detailed info and a study on Jubilee, the year of Jubilee in the Bible. Until next time, I'm Brian Moore, reminding you that from the rising of the sun to the going down of the same, the name of the Lord shall be praised.